The Coastwatch podcast is brought to you by our premium partners at Coastwatch Connect. Email the Coastwatch team to become a corporate member and connect your business to our coastal community. Well, today we're very excited to kick things off with a great panel of guests and a conversation on weather, cyclones, and their recent and historic impact on our coastline. And I'm very pleased to be joined this morning by Anthony Cornelius, who's a Brisbane-based meteorologist with 20 plus years experience in severe weather, and also the owner of Weatherwatch, which is a well-respected consultancy operating nationally with advanced forecasting and modelling technologies. Anthony, great to welcome you.
Thank you.
We've also got Josh Toohey here, who's a self-proclaimed weather nerd and the founder of Cyclones Oz, which has built a large and loyal following on the back of Josh's detailed and accurate commentary on severe weather around the country. Josh, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
And of course, our own Rod Figeuiredo, marine biologist, 20 plus years, diving instructor, boating, fishing, all things in between, marine life. Rod, great to have you.
Good to be here.
Well, guys, we'll get straight into it. And Anthony, I'll start with you, I guess. Firstly, can you just explain for us what a cyclone is? I guess the defining characteristics of the cyclones we see here in Australia, and perhaps how they've shaped our coastline.
Yeah, certainly. So I think, and obviously before we get started, obviously we have to, put a pretense in there. There are actually multiple different types of cyclones. And I think what we definitely going to be discussing today is tropical cyclones, but obviously there's not to be confused with east coast cyclones and polar cyclones and so forth. But essentially, a tropical cyclone is a broad scale low pressure system that it's a warm chord system, so that is occurs over warm waters, typically above 27 degrees, and in particular has winds exceeding or sustained winds of more than 63 kilometers an hour, around more than halfway around the center. So that's essentially what a tropical cyclone is. And obviously, throughout history, they've certainly had some big impacts along the coastline, and we particularly know that even around the southeast Queensland region, there has been previous tropical cyclones that have impacted, such as some people who are based in southeast Queensland might be aware of North Stradbroke Island and South Stradbroke Island. They used to be joined together. So, but quite a long time ago, there was a tropical cyclone that ended up splitting those two islands. So absolutely, they do have certainly impacted our coastline, and even recently we've seen other shapes, not necessarily directly to Alfred, but other sort of broader systems that have influenced the coastline around Bribie Island and the Sunshine Coast, and even in recent years that the topography around there has shifted.
And the cyclone categories, Anthony, can you just explain for us what they are, and I suppose what characterises them both scientifically and in terms of impact, because the category doesn't always correlate with the impact.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. So ultimately, tropical cyclones are categorized by wind strength, and I think it's an important distinction because obviously there's other aspects, and the other flip side to tropical cyclones, of course, is very heavy rainfall. So when it comes to that, rainfall does not play a part in terms of categorizing a tropical cyclone. And absolutely, we have had some very big tropical cyclones that have, of course, produced very, very intense rainfall, but perhaps have not had those strong winds. But nonetheless, that significant rainfall has played produced significant damage. But if we look at, say, the tropical cyclone wind aspect of it, so typically we would see Category 1 systems of wind gusts up to about 125 kilometers per hour. As Category 2 systems, 125 to 165 kilometers per hour. Category 3 then is about 165 to 225. Category 4, 225 to 280, and then generally, wind gusts exceeding 280 kilometers an hour. Those are typically what we'd see in a Category 5 system. So, when it comes to the categorization of tropical cyclones, it's not unusual perhaps for one section of the tropical cyclone to be more intense than the other. So perhaps one half could have Category 3 winds, the other half could have Category 2 winds. So it does certainly depend on that. And I think that's probably one of the confusing things about tropical cyclones too, is that depending on what part of the tropical cyclone actually impacts you, could greatly impact the experience or the impacts that you receive from that tropical cyclone. So, and I think that's we often hear people say, for instance, I've been in a Category 4, it wasn't that bad, and it's quite possible the system was a Category 4, but they weren't actually in the most intense parts. So, it's an important thing just to remember that unless the eye wall has gone over you, that perhaps you have not experienced the worst of a tropical cyclone.
Now we might jump to, I guess, Tropical Cyclone Alfred, or what became ex-Tropical Cyclone Alfred when it made landfall. Josh, people were frantically looking at weather models and looking at different sources of information. Um, can you maybe kick us off in terms of describing or explaining the different weather models and I guess what the strengths and weaknesses of the different models are when you're discerning what information you deem to be accurate?
When you're making a tropical cyclone forecast, you use a whole host of information to get an accurate representation of the tropical cyclone at the start, so at initialization, which is hour zero or the right now. And then you look at the forecast modeling and you discern what information from said forecast models or multiple forecast models is shaping up to be the most accurate and most reliable information. And Alfred was a unique case where it was a system that was quite slow moving, so forecast models were picking up on that. And when you get slow moving slash stalling systems, some of the forecast models can interpret the data really strangely. The axis was a perfect example of that in some forecast runs because the axis is what we describe as a convective forecast model. So it's got a massive bias towards thunderstorms, which is what tropical cyclones are made up of. Because of the stalling motion over, I guess, semi-favorable conditions and the amount of time that it had before landfall, the axis blew the intensity of Tropical Cyclone Alfred up well out of proportion on the forecast. And at one point, I think with 36 hours left to its landfall on South Stradbroke Island or North Stradbroke Island, wherever it was going in from the axis forecast at that point in time, it was calling for a Category 3 strength tropical cyclone off my memory going into that area. So, and that was obviously not going to happen. And that's where you take an eclectic mix of forecast model data. I was using the European forecast, the GFS forecast, modeling data, plus my best guess as well. Sometimes it's a good idea to have a feel and see what's coming through and see what is being reported on the ground as well. And that can sometimes paint a pretty accurate picture as well, or at least that's how I found in my experience. And I wrote the Axis forecast off pretty much from that model run and was using a mix of the European and the GFS forecast, both of which are different in their own. So the European forecast model is a higher resolution forecast, which means it can crank out some better detail. But again, sometimes it does have that bias towards intensity. And then the GFS has a lower resolution forecast, which means it doesn't have as much data. So it normally underestimates peak wind speeds, for example, and also peak rainfall accumulations, especially in mountainous regions like southeast Queensland and the Gold Coast hinterland. But it's also got a bias towards land and landfalling systems, which is why it was actually calling for that landfall on the central Queensland coastline for that period of time in late Feb. And that was also why the GFS had it coming ashore as a tropical cyclone a lot sooner on the forecast than it actually did in reality. So it's all those little bits of information that you pick up as a tracker or looking at the forecast models, and that you can mix them all together, you can blend them all together, and you can get a pretty accurate forecast. And that's what I did for Tropical Cyclone Alfred, and ended up getting a reasonably accurate forecast out of that system there for my own audience. But yeah, that's how I went about forecasting it with the difference between forecast models.
Rod, I might bring you in terms of what Josh has just outlined, and I guess more specifically around some of the ocean conditions and swell conditions, and how you go about approaching the models.
Yeah, it's like he said, you cannot just trust one model, especially in a situation like this. I was actually using both of those guests here as my reference, and my time there, I was at home just receiving phone calls. What's gonna happen? I said, just stay at home. We don't know what's happening. No one can actually predict much. And most of the moms from my son's school, they were expecting the worst. And my job was to calm them a little bit. Okay, it's not gonna be that bad. The media is just telling you guys to be ready for something that probably is not gonna happen. But I was trying just to calm everyone and just understanding what was about to happen. While I was understanding the path of the cyclone, I was showing my son, he's only 8 years old, and I was showing that was coming through one of our favorite areas here in Australia, which is Lady Musgrave. and he started to cry because I explained to him the impact into all the marine life and the birds, everything in that area. And that's something that actually ended up happening not there, but down here. And I'll explain a little bit later the impacts of what happened.
Can I just jump in real quick? The media was there was definitely a bit of hype towards the system in places, but I feel like the hype was misinterpreted by some as hype for wind speeds. And the general gist of it is that the wind speeds, they weren't as bad as what southeast Queensland could have experienced. I think we saw peak wind gusts between 90 to 125 kilometers an hour, which kind of only just made it a Category 1 strength tropical cyclone. And a Category 1 strength cyclone on the Australian scale, purely from a wind standpoint, is not a massive beast of a system. It will still cause damage and some levels of devastation, especially in areas not built for it, like southeast Queensland, but it's not like an apocalypse, which is what people were kind of discerning from some of the media forecasts. But when we were talking about it, and especially as a forecaster standpoint, I was saying that it was going to be quite a bad system, but I was wrapping the rainfall forecast into that as well. And the rainfall, as we found out later, was an absolute disaster for many areas in southeast Queensland.
Anthony, I might bring you back in, and I guess it did surprise us a bit in southeast Queensland. The forecast alarmed a few people. There was a bit of alarm, but I guess historically it's not as unusual as what people might think. And I guess going back to the late 19th century, and in particular that 1893 event that there are records on, could you maybe just talk a bit to that in terms of, I guess, where this sat in a historical context?
Yeah, certainly. And I think obviously when it comes to tropical cyclones, there's a whole lot of complexities with it, and even with respect to Alfred as well. I think in many ways, Southeast Queensland was quite fortunate that the obviously it was more of a Category 1 system rather than a Category 2 system. So I think there has been a couple of reports released by JCU about just if the winds on average were about 10 or 20 kilometres an hour stronger. Would have been obviously the damage or that occurred from Alfred would have been an order of magnitude higher. So in that regards, I think we're quite lucky because obviously, as we mentioned, the southeast Queensland region isn't really built to, particularly some of the oldest buildings, certainly aren't really built to withstand those types of winds. So I think that was certainly quite a good result in that regard. In terms of historical systems, obviously, yeah, there was a lot of surprise in terms of Alfred because I think a lot of people have grown up just thinking that the tropical cyclones don't impact southeast Queensland. But if we go through the history, we can see that absolutely southeast Queensland, even northeast New South Wales, has been impacted by tropical cyclones. 1893 in particular was a extreme year in terms of where there was, I believe, 4 tropical cyclones crossed the coastline between Rockhampton and the New South Wales border in the space of a month. So and led to some very, very significant flooding. Obviously, 1893 floods has been by far the benchmark of floods for in particular Brisbane. So absolutely, we know these things can occur. And if we do look back into the 1880s and 1890s, we've actually got a period of very, very frequent systems through the region. So not just 1893, but I think 1892, and there was another system in 1887 as well. So there are also tropical cyclones or tropical-like systems as well. I should sort of say that there's also sort of this sort of borderline. Is it a tropical cyclone? Is it more a subtropical system and so forth? And obviously there was even discussions around Alfred as to whether it was a true tropical cyclone or whether or not it was subtropical and so forth. And that's definitely going to be a discussion, I think, for meteorologists and researchers in the future. But yeah, without a doubt, of course, that there's been significant systems, and obviously the most significant system to date, I think, in terms of purely wind strength, is the 1954 Gold Coast system, which was a likely Category 3. So that crossed the Gold Coast region and caused a significant amount of damage through there into the northeast New South Wales region. Also, we've also had tropical cyclone Dina as well. I think that was 1967. So and that produced obviously clipped the northern part of Fraser Island. It was still a Category 4 as it obviously did not hit the southeast Queensland region. Fortunately, it did swing out back towards the southeast, but in line of Brisbane's latitude, it was still a Category 4 system. So absolutely is I guess a reminder to us, and Alfred was a very good reminder that while they are not as common as particularly areas further north, we're absolutely susceptible to tropical cyclones in the southeast Queensland region.
Mm. You touched on it earlier, Anthony, but there's some degree of concern at the moment as to what's happening on the Sunshine Coast, particularly around that Bribie Island, Caloundra area, where there were forecasts that Alfred was going to come in there at one point, particularly with the recent breakthroughs. There's been a second breakthrough across Bribie Island. What are your thoughts on that situation in terms of what might play out there, and I guess the coastal structures there?
Yeah, certainly, and obviously for full disclosure, obviously I work as a meteorologist, so probably not as well versed and able to sort of refer to obviously that will happen with the coastal alignment. But from my understanding, of course, I think there will be the potential for additional sort of changes to occur through there. Obviously, some areas that were perhaps sheltered from the Bribie Island region are now no longer sheltered. So absolutely, we'll see that. Of course, we have to remember this is all part of a natural cycle. So for millions of years, those islands have been shifting around. They are sand islands, of course. So naturally, that is normal. And of course, that's just expected. So I think in that regards, we've built in these areas, and for a period of time, it's been a certain way. But of course, we know over time. The landscape changes. I think that's just a relation to that, and of course, tropical cyclones. Even though, as I said, it's been a long time since we've had a direct impact, or being directly impacted by a tropical cyclone in southeast Queensland. But throughout history, there's certainly been, even recent history, a lot of systems have brought large swells to the region. So we do get a lot of systems that do recurve away from the coastline as they do track into the southern Coral Sea. Most of the time, they do move away to the southeast, which is in relation to strengthening winds in the upper atmosphere. So tropical cyclones sort of if we think about them like a big sailboat, for instance, they get pushed around by the upper level winds in the upper atmosphere. So generally, as those systems track further southwards, most of the time, not always, of course, but most of the time, they end up getting pushed away because the upper level winds, particularly down this way, generally come in from the west, so it tends to push systems off to the east. So that's certainly something that we do see. Conversely, obviously, it's the opposite in Western Australia. We see a lot of recurvature occur, and of course, when they do track southwards, they're more likely to recurve back to the east, which of course ends up pushing them towards the coastline.
Rod, we'll talk about the marine life and I guess the impact there, because these sorts of events can have quite an enduring impact, I guess an initial impact, but an enduring impact on the marine environments. Can you just talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, for example, I don't think people realize what happened offshore. For example, we had waves of 16 meters high. So we're talking like a big event, which impacts the entire coastal line. For example, I've been recently to Noosa, and it reshaped the entire mouth of the river. So we shift so much of the coastline in the sand. So, and that puts impact of everything. Pretty much all the biodiversity was impacted by it, by like not only from like the seagrass that needs just to. Sorry, there's a lot of people laughing here. It was impacted not only by, like, for example, seagrass. When you have so much sediment, so much like coming from the rivers and sand, it will cover the seagrass and the dugongs and the turtles. They don't have food, and these it might take like up to 2 years for the seagrass, for the meadows, just to regrow to the same way that they were before. And these not only impact the dugongs and turtles, but all the other living beings that are there, like for little crabs, little fish. And a lot of rubbish came from the cities, from the Logan River, Brisbane River, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast. It was impact. Debris, like green waste, industrial waste, oils, and everything will stay here for a long time till we have or the new cyclone or it all goes to normal. Yeah, it was a big impact. And like, I mean, a lot of groups from fishing, spearfishing, and diving, and everyone keeps talking about like the visibility and the lack of fish. We're still, after 2 months, still feeling the impact and seeing the impacts of what happened, and we might still see for a long time.
Just on that note, I guess looking ahead, and Josh, you're Perth based, and I guess you and Anthony are covering these events nationally. But what do you think we can expect in the years to come? I guess in the 2025-26 cyclone season, but more generally the sort of weather cycle that we're in, and Anthony touched on that as well.
So, in terms of like direct impacts of tropical cyclones, it's impossible to forecast exactly where they're going to make landfall when they haven't formed yet. So, saying that there's going to be a forecast for a southeast Queensland landfall again, that's impossible to make unless a tropical cyclone is actually headed in that direction. But in terms of longer range forecasts, you can generally get a relatively good understanding of what systems are going to develop in what places, what areas are going to be hotspots. And forecasts and forecast technology, especially over the last 5 years, I've noticed has came leaps and bounds. Even looking back to the 2022-23 tropical cyclone season to the season just gone, the forecast technology is orders of magnitude better, more reliable, and can predict accurately further on into the future. In terms of what's happening for the 25-26 season, right now, there's a bit of a mixed bag of pointers at this point in time, at least from what I've seen, and I haven't taken too much of a detailed look into it, so I'll pass this on to Anthony quickly. But I'm right now looking at a general average to slightly below average trend in tropical cyclone numbers, and rainfall looks pretty much around average for much of the north, probably more so into the north and the northeast. Around the northeast, it could be slightly above average, but I'll hand this over to Anthony, who's probably got a much greater wealth of knowledge on the longer range forecasting technologies.
Yeah, yeah, obviously, when it comes to the long range, obviously, as Josh mentioned, yeah, obviously, even beyond that sort of 3 to 4 month period becomes quite difficult and challenging in regards to those climate forecasts. And I think what we're really seeing, of course, is a lot of our recent knowledge, and obviously keep in mind in the 90s there was a lot of research done in terms of, I guess, sort of really understanding how the Pacific Ocean, so El Nino Southern Oscillation, the Indian Ocean Dipole, and so forth. So there's a lot of fantastic research that came out through there, and that was all based on sea surface temperatures based from about sort of the 1960s to the 1990s. What we've now found, of course, though, as we move beyond that period, is that the oceans now overall are generally above average. So it's becoming a lot more challenging to sort of discern those types of features. So, we're looking at patterns, and we're normally usually seeing, an area of cool water, an area of warm water in the Pacific Ocean, and rather than seeing that, now actually seeing the entire Pacific Ocean warmer. So that's become a real challenging point to try and sort of differentiate and say, well, what are we certainly looking at? There was, I think, some of the long range forecast models were forecasting some cooling in the eastern Pacific Ocean. That's not really eventuated, and certainly, large parts of the Pacific Ocean are, still remaining quite above average. So I think those types of potential, aspects of it, I would say is going to be less likely, because I think, as I said, there was even early hints of, potentially even push into an El Nino, but I think that's becoming less likely. Some sort of at least neutral pattern is likely. But even as a beyond that, I mean, even if we look the ocean temperatures in itself. So those warming ocean temperatures, and of course, we can't just say, oh, the ocean's getting warmer, it's going to be more tropical cyclones, it's going to be more intense tropical cyclones and things like that. It's not as simple as that. But what we do know, of course, is that tropical cyclones, they need warm ocean temperatures generally above 27 degrees. So if the ocean's already warmer, then that's only one piece of the puzzle that's already there for tropical cyclone development. So, and I think in regards to that, we're probably going to see aspects of um, tropical cyclone potential tracking southwards in the Australian region, just because of those warm ocean temperatures. Now, that does not mean that we'll see more frequent events, just perhaps that the potential for more southern systems is going to increase. So, and that's purely just in the case that we do have those ocean temperatures a little bit warmer. If we look at the ocean temperatures this year, at times they were nearly nudging 28 degrees off the southern Queensland coastline. So that's certainly well exceeding the threshold for even tropical cyclone development. So, as I said, I think that's certainly the patterns that we will see. There's even been some recent studies that have suggested that the I guess the southward landfall of tropical cyclones over the coming decades could track as much as about 60 to 70 kilometres southwards per decade. So I think these are all certainly features that we'll certainly uh, you know we'll see come about over the coming period.
I would just love to jump in here real quick as well and add to what Anthony's just said there. But generally speaking, we have had that decreased number in tropical cyclone activity over the last 20 years or so. Like the season that we just had with 12 tropical cyclones, people are looking at that thinking that's an insane amount of tropical cyclones, but that's kind of bang on the long-term average back into the 1900s. So the seasons, recently speaking, have been a lot quieter in terms of tropical cyclone numbers, but we just came out of a season with 8 severe tropical cyclones, I believe, or somewhere in that ballpark number. So the seasons are getting quite a lot more intense in terms of how strong these tropical cyclones are becoming, and that boils back to the sea temperatures as well. Not the complete piece, not the complete puzzle, but one piece of the puzzle. When you have sea temperatures that are even 1 or 2 degrees Celsius above average, which isn't a significant jump, and especially with the warming trend we have seen, especially across the Pacific Ocean, those waters can hold an order of magnitude more energy and release that when a tropical cyclone is passing over them. And when we've got sea temperatures off Queensland and especially Western Australia, contributing to tropical cyclone Zelia and tropical cyclone Errol's explosive intensification in the previous months, with those sea temperatures pushing 30, 31, even pushing 31 and a half or closer to 32, which they were earlier this year for tropical cyclone Zelia, the amount of energy that's in those waters that those systems tapped into was incredible, and that's why they became such strong systems in a very, very quick period of time as well. And that's a general trend that I expect to see across Australian waters in the coming decades.
If we just take a moment, I guess, to just reflect on, I guess, the learnings or the takeaways from Alfred, insofar as the preparations, the response. Was it proportionate? I guess when you've got a severe weather event bearing on a major metropolitan area, we've become a bit, I guess, sensitive here in southeast Queensland, but it's something that our friends in the north are well and truly used to. But what are your thoughts? I mean, was the preparation suitable, adequate, and looking ahead, what can we take away from it?
As somebody who was presenting the information to a very wide audience, and I was constantly messaging people as well, I think I reached out to about 600 people in southeast Queensland whilst preparing for the tropical cyclone. I can say that a lot of people took the warnings very seriously, and the preparations in a lot of areas were done to where they were completed to what was necessary and what was advised by the Bureau of Meteorology. And I believe that all of the preparation advice that BOM gave out for especially wind speeds was excellent, and I feel like the advice of making sure that there was no loose items or objects in the backyard that could fly around, for example, and become missiles basically in a tropical cyclone. I feel like the advice that BOM gave generally was very good, and that people were adequately prepared for wind speeds. But I believe that, again, and this will come over the coming couple of years with enhancements in forecast modeling technology, that the rainfall threat from tropical cyclone Alfred was very much overlooked, and a lot more could have been done for a lot more people in flood-prone areas. And I believe that's why tropical cyclone Alfred is kind of a system that's unfortunately left quite a sour taste in southeast Queensland and made people very, very kind of sensitive to the topic of tropical cyclones down there. The rainfall threat has done that pretty much entirely. And I believe that if there was much better understanding of what rainfall was actually going to come in from tropical cyclone Alfred, that people would have been much better prepared for the system.
Anthony, how do you feel about that?
Look, I think in terms of obviously there's multiple aspects to this, and I think this was probably the first time in well ever for Australians history where a tropical cyclone was threatening a population of about 3 million people. And when you think about it logistically, that's an incredible task when we sort of think about other tropical cyclones in particular up north. Perhaps they would only impact, obviously 1 or 200,000 people. So in terms of this, the population impacted. So I definitely think from an emergency service point of view, that was a massive challenge. And obviously we working with quite a few of the emergency services here in southeast Queensland, and I know that they have or they had prepared for this in terms of a what if a category 3 did impact the southeast Queensland region, and I think in an odd way, the Gold Coast is probably what the most best prepared. I just know from personal experience because that's an organisation we do work with, and after perhaps not everyone's aware of it, but obviously there's some very significant thunderstorms. The Gold Coast Christmas Day thunderstorm that produced those very significant winds of Christmas 2023. And that certainly gave them a good insight as to what it could feel like if a tropical cyclone was to impact the Gold Coast. So I think that there's been a lot of preparation in recent years about understanding that the risk is that we do know that they can occur. And obviously, I think there was some criticism that perhaps the threat was overblown in various aspects. But as I said, it was a big unknown in terms of we did have what potentially could have been a strong, at least a Category 2 system impact the region. And certainly had that occurred, we would have seen significantly more damage. And I think we have to see that as we need to be considerate, rather than being upset perhaps that that didn't occur. We should actually be happy the fact that it didn't occur, because it's absolutely. I mean, even in its current intensity, we still saw areas that were blacked out for about a week. And if those winds were even stronger, perhaps the period of no power, and obviously the damage and the recovery just would have been so much worse. In this point, it ended up being a case of I think it was obviously there was a blackout aspect of it, because there was at one point so many so I think nearly 400,000 premises without power. But it would end up being mostly a rainfall threat, which while significant, is not something that we're certainly well accustomed to heavy rainfall events in the southeast Queensland region. And what we're not accustomed, of course, is that heavy rainfall event combining with a significant wind event. So in many ways, I think we should rather see it as a fortunate aspect of it. But I certainly hope that people do continue to take these threats seriously. So when it does come to tropical cyclones, it's a good thing if the impact is less than what we expect.
Always hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
And Rod, you're not a Brisbane native, of course. You grew up in Brazil. You've worked around the world internationally as a diving instructor, a cinematographer. How do you rate, I guess, the Australian weather infrastructure and an organisation like BOM, as well as the other weather resources we've got, and our response to this?
I think that I cannot just say that it's one of the best in the world. It is the best in the world for me. I used all the time. I totally trust. When I started my career as a dive instructor and at university, I learned with the Navy about how to uh, predict into how to do the weather. And so much changed. We are so far ahead from like 20 years ago. I wouldn't expect 20 years ago there would be that precise. I'm so happy. I'm still a little bit sad what people, they don't understand what is the forecast. They think it's, if Bowen is saying that it's going to be raining or it's going to be blowing 50 knots, if it's blowing 12 knots, oh, Bowen got it wrong. And they just start just to blame the weatherman, and they don't understand much about it. But I think we're getting there. More people are being educated, thanks to Anthony and Josh, how the weather works. And I would say I totally trust the weatherman.
Well, on that note, gentlemen, we can talk about these things all day, and there's always plenty more to talk about. But we look forward to leaning on your expertise and knowledge going forward here at Coastwatch while we develop our weather offering. Thanks very much, gentlemen, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
Not a
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to be here. Bye.
Well, thanks for joining us today on the revived Coastwatch podcast. Moving forward, our podcast will cover the full range of Coastwatch's coastal content, extending to boating, fishing, surfing, biodiversity, and broader coastal leisure. So you can head online to coastwatch.com.au and sign up to the Coastwatch Club to be the first to listen and watch these podcasts. And also sign up to the Coastwatch YouTube channel at youtube.com/@coastwatch1. So stay tuned, and in the meantime, don't destroy what you came to enjoy.